With poems that beg to be sung, chanted, read aloud, Lana Hechtman Ayers imbues her lyrical poetry with the magical and the everyday, with both the natural world and the concrete, man made world, always with deep empathy for her fellow creatures, and with an eye toward expanding how we understand our place in the universe. I'm C.W. Emerson, and this is The Older American Poet. Join me for a conversation with Lana Hechtman Ayers, the author of 10 poetry collections and chapbooks, as we discuss her latest collection, The Autobiography of Rain, how she balances the roles of both poet and publisher, and the importance of keeping poetry alive and well in the world today. Lana, thank you for joining me here today. I appreciate it very much. It's wonderful to be able to talk about your new collection, which is coming out April 6th, right?
August, yes, August 6th.
What did I say,
Just,
April? August, we're in August, August 6th.
yes,
That's been 5 days. It's
that's in
called The
5 days.
Autobiography of Rain. That's wonderful. Can you tell me a little bit about what inspired the title and the metaphor of rain and weather, which runs all through it?
Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here with you, and I'm really honored that you asked me. Um, the Autobiography of Rain. Well, the title sort of came to me, and then the poem that actually contains that phrase came later. So that was sort of interesting. But all my life, I've had a connection to the rain. It's kind of a balm to me. And gray days are my saving grace, where everyone else is worshiping sun, and it's never been kind to me. And I think part of it is actually my body chemistry. There are people that have something called reverse seasonal affective disorder or inverse seasonal affective disorder. And I'm one of those people, actually. And so too many days of sun exposure in a row, and I get really depressed, which is
Mhm.
kind of crazy. But everybody's different. And so I was an oddball at birth for that very reason, because I kind of shied away from the sun. And I'm an oddball because I'm a poet. But rain is something that's essential to life. I mean, rain is the reason we have life on Earth. So it is an essential, necessary kind of thing that people dread. You know, people don't want rain on their wedding day. They don't want floods. Certainly, floods are devastating and destroy everything. So rain has a duality to it.
Hmm.
And I feel like that maybe this whole collection is about duality in some ways.
Hmm.
It's
Well,
about joy and grief and
uh-huh.
beauty and the destruction of innocence, and it's about kind of all different dualities. And so I just identify with the rain, and the rain as being a duality.
I think there's a way that holding those dualities runs all through your poetry in the book. I can think of a number of juxtapositions that you have: grief, joy, loss, and bliss. And you hold those with a great dexterity, I think.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
I know that the book is dedicated to one of your mentors and friends, Patricia Farnioli. Am I getting
Mhm.
that right? Yes. And I was doing some research on her and realized she published her first book when she was into her 60s. Is
That's
that
true.
correct? And she
That's
was
true.
a teacher and a mentor of yours. Can you tell me something about your relationship with her and how she found her way into this collection?
Well, I've been really fortunate to have worked with amazing poets for years. And my first poetry mentor, actually, my first ever was I was in my 30s, and his name was Otone Riccio, who a previous book is dedicated to. Um, he was somebody that believed poetry was for the people, and invited us all to get our poems, get a handful of magnets, go to a Sears store and put them up on the refrigerators in Sears. Poetry was meant for the people. And I worked with him for a dozen years and learned about craft, quite a lot about craft. Um, but I guess I was yearning to learn how the poets did what they did. Um, And I was nearly 40 when that yearning to learn more about poetry itself. I had been reading, Pablo Neruda, Octavia Paz, Sylvia Plath, Emily Dickinson, and contemporaries like Ellen Bass, Tim Siebles, Lee Young Lee, and Patricia Fargnoli. And I just wanted to know, how do they do it? And there's something that I'm not getting here that I just would love to know. And it turns out that as I started to look for more workshops, I lived in New Hampshire at the time, and Patricia Fargnoli, unbeknownst to me, this poet whose book I read and was absolutely awed by, lived a couple of hours away from me in New Hampshire. And she lived in Keene, New Hampshire, and was giving workshops. And so I just signed up and drove the 2 hours and went to the workshop, and I was just flabbergasted at the knowledge that this woman exuded, and the care she took with everyone's poems. And she almost immediately took me under her wing. She told me that my work mattered, and that's something that every poet wants to hear, and I hadn't heard before. And she, not only that, she said that my poetry, is worth considering. It's worth sending out to literary journals, not just, and I tell all people in my workshops, go and get your poetry out into the world any way you can, because literary journals are not the only way. But she said, you really need to get your message out, and you should send work out. So I did. And I told her that I really wanted to learn about poetry because I had been a math major in college and I didn't have a background in studying literature. And I said, what do you think of getting an MFA? And Patricia wrote me the most glorious letter you could imagine. And I went to study poetry to see what I was writing against, what I was writing toward, what I was writing in conversation with. And Patricia was my biggest cheerleader all throughout that, through the MFA. And I don't think I ever would have put a book together if not for her telling me that it was worth having my book in the world. And she became a dear, dear friend, and she remains so. And unfortunately, she passed away in 2021. But I don't know if you would mind me doing this. Could I read a poem of Patricia's?
I'd love it. I'd love it.
So I would love to read to you her poem. It's from her collection called Duties of the Spirit, from Tupelo Press. And it's called Duties of the Spirit. And this is one of my favorite poems, but there are so many favorite poems. It has an epigraph. One of the duties of the spirit is joy, and another is serenity. Thornton Wilder. Duties of the spirit. If the first is joy, the rumba at sunrise, a 3-note whistle in the sugar maple, and the second is serenity, a chair by a quiet window, the wind fading down the hill at sleep, then the third must be grief, rock tight, then loosening like scarves the wind takes across the ocean, while on the shore the shell's empty houses lie scattered. And if the first is in the brief seconds, which are all we can keep of happiness, and if the second waits alone in the hour where the pond smooths out its surface unbroken, and the moon in it, then the third, which is grief, comes again and again, longer and more than we wanted or ever wished for, to wash us clean with its salt water, to empty our throats and fill them again with bloodroot song. And if the first duty of the spirit is leaping joy, and the second the slow stroll of serenity, then grief, the third, comes bending on his walking stick, holding a trowel to dig where the loves have gone. And he weighs down your shoulders, ties a rawhide necklace hung with a stone around your neck, and hangs on and on. But the first is slippery joy.
Beautiful.
It's just, yeah. I mean, to me, she was the poet of joy. And
Mhm.
it's funny because she dubbed me the poet of grief.
Well, two sides of the same coin in many ways.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
she weaves nature images into that poem as
Mhm.
she ends in a joyful place. It reminds me of something that I think is characteristic of your poems, and that is that nature is used not only to express the beauty and the evocative nature of nature
Mhm.
itself, but also as a means to illuminate the human condition. Do you
Mhm.
find that that's an accurate statement of what your poetry seeks to do using images of nature?
Yes, I think what it is that well, part of it is that we feel separate from nature. Like humans and nature stand apart, where we feel like there's a separation. But I think that separation is really an illusion. It feels like we're all made of the same stardust. The evergreen trees outside my window, the deer that ate all my hydrangeas yesterday, myself, we're all the same. We're all the same. And I think we forget that. And so I think part of the reason that nature is such a big influence on me is that despite the fact that I feel alone in my own skin most of the time, I realize that I'm not because it's an illusion. We're all connected. We're all part of the same existence. And I think you do that as well. And I've had the distinct pleasure of reading your collection before it's come out, which is Luminous Body Glittering Ash, due out soon from Eyewear Press.
We
And
hope. We're keeping fingers crossed.
I think you do that in your poem, particularly The Gardener, which is so exquisite. I don't know
Oh, thank you.
if you're prepared to say anything about The Gardener, but I'll tell you what I think I see there and what I think connects to my experience of how I write about nature is that in that poem, I don't know if you have that poem available to read or not, but there the gardener himself is fighting to save a yucca and dealing with roses that aren't things aren't going in nature the way the gardener would like them to.
No,
And but there is and then there's the grandfather who's also in the poem, who's also having trouble with a plant that's taking 5 years to bloom. And
right.
it's sort of about the fact that um we have to let go, yeah, as human beings, our superiority and you know the fact that we're not really in control of anything, that everything
Right.
has its own life and its own time frame and its own way of being in the world. And I think that your poem ends so beautifully. I hope I'm not giving anything away here,
No,
but
no secret.
because there's the sweetness of the three figs at the end of this poem, just this exquisite warm figs, that if we just step back a bit and allow nature to be and allow ourselves to be and everything to be themselves, then there's a sweetness to be had.
Right.
Even in the fact that the blooms are delayed 5 years on the orange blossom, and that we can't get the roses to go, and that the yucca is struggling. There's a beauty in everything's existence and the way that it takes its time and the way that it unfolds. And I think for
Thank
me,
you.
that's just what I'm trying to express as well.
Well, I think that, and I'm not going to pull that poem out, but thank you. You quoted from it beautifully, but it reminds me of sort of the disparate nature of thinking and feeling, and how much we allow our thought to almost make us believe that we dominate the universe. And in some ways we do, and we undervalue feeling. You have a poem called The Joy of Words in this
Mhm.
collection. And if I can quote from it, I think it's the last stanza of the poem. You say, "Let focus dissolve. Let us lose ourselves in the maze of patterns across the page until only our hearts can read them."
Right.
I love that. And it seems to me you are pointing to our tendency to overprivilege thought and maybe underemphasize feeling our way into the world with the heart. Uh, is there anything to that? Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I think, well, we have our limits, right? Because language is our tool. And language is kind of a limited tool. There aren't exactly words that say all of the things we want to express. And finding precise words that mean the same to everyone is an impossibility because words take on emotional impact and they take on memories. And so, despite the only tools we have, I could say to you, the moon is like an afternoon horse. And if you had a beloved pony in childhood, that would be an image that felt very lovely to you. However, if your uncle's old mare on the farm bit you, you're going to think, wow, that's an ugly moon. I don't want to get near that moon. So we have that problem that language doesn't always say the same thing to every person that hears the same words. And Jane Hirschfield, I just heard her speak yesterday, says that if a poem is working, the reader will feel its meaning. So it's something that kind of goes beyond the denotative voice of words, and that, and even beyond the connotative, that the feeling of the poem comes across somehow. And I always think that the poem you write is different for every reader because every reader completes the poem. No poem is ever really complete until it has a listener or a reader because they have to bring their own experiences to it as well. So, despite the fact that I may think I wrote a poem about my, you know, very happy time with a particular beloved, they may think that it's a poem about impending divorce. But that's okay too. That's okay too, because I think we have an intentionality sometimes when we write, and that sometimes the muse knows what we're doing more than we are, and the meaning comes through that we don't even see. There is subtext to our work that we don't even know are there until the reader comes to it and brings their own lives and their own experiences, and that's beautiful too.
Yes.
um, Joseph Millar says that poetry is trying to say something there are no words for. And I think that's the real truth of it. And that's why we have to read the poems with our hearts and our emotions and our experiences, and make connections that we can make as best we can.
And I love the idea of a family that's shopping for a new fridge at Sears, walks by and gets bedazzled by these words stuck up on the refrigerator, and who knows how they're going to take that in. But in any case, it's going to shock them out of their appliance shopping mode and into some other sort of realization that the world has something else to offer as well. I love that idea.
Yeah.
I want to ask
Yeah.
you before we end, and I'm telling you that we're going to have a part two because I have so many other things I want to talk to you about. Um, but I want to talk a little bit to find out about the role of being a poet and a publisher and how
Mhm.
that works for you.
Mhm.
Uh, can you say a little bit of something about that?
Well, I feel like I have to start at uh, sort of why poetry to answer that question for me. So, um, poetry came to me when I was quite young, and kind of had a kind of a harrowing childhood. And I discovered a poetry book in our basement at the bottom of a donation bag because we got donation bags from the church that usually had clothes and other important things. But at the bottom, there were a book of poems and they were discarded in our basement. And that's how I first came upon poetry. And what reading those poems taught me, I probably was 5 or 6, and I was a very young reader because I had the good fortune to have a next door neighbor 5 years older than me who came home from school and taught me her lessons. So I learned how to read very young. And what I discovered in those books was that I wasn't alone in my feelings of being in a difficult situation. I discovered that, across cultures, across time, across gender, that there were other people out there who had experienced the kinds of things that I was experiencing, and not only had survived, but they'd thrived and they came to write about it. And these words touched me so deeply. And I'm not sure I even understood a lot of what I was reading, but enough to know that I wasn't alone.
Mhm.
And I was making a connection out there in the world with these unknown poets. And so that's how it came to me first. And it became my kind of guiding force in life. It became my spiritual practice, not only reading poetry, but then I came to write poetry on my own. And it's how I attempt to learn about myself, how I attempt to make meaning of the world. And for me, every poem is a love letter to someone I may never meet, but a love letter saying we're all in this together. And um, it has poetry just sustains me, and it broadens my worldview, and it allows me to be more compassionate. I believe we're all alike, more alike than we are different, but we can find our differences find us ways into compassion through reading the poems. And so, because poetry has been such a sustaining force in my life, I felt like I had to give something back. And a lot of people, they tithe to their church. Well, to me, my way of tithing was creating the outlets and venues for poetry to appear in the world. And I started with a journal, which was called Concrete Wolf, and then I started publishing chapbooks and books, and then I grew to another press because I discovered there were so many poets in the Pacific Northwest where I had moved that there needed to be more books for those poets. And so that's kind of how I came into publishing. And one thing I read, humorist named Don Marquis, philosopher, humorist, his quote was, "Publishing a book of poetry is like dropping a rose petal down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo."
Wow.
And I think he's wrong. I do. I think he's wrong. Brilliant writer, brilliant, brilliant. But um, I think that every poem matters, and that it's important because there is that special person out there that is waiting for your words the way I was waiting for words when I was a child and needed them so desperately. There's a poet named Sean Thomas Doherty who expresses that in a short poem called Why Bother, that says it more brilliantly than I think anyone's ever said it. Why bother? Because right now, there is someone out there with a wound in the exact shape of your words. And that's it for me. I think poetry, it is a balm to our wounds, the way rain was a balm for me, the way poetry was a balm for me.
And the world needs that now
More than
any time
ever,
I can remember.
we need
Yeah,
poetry. We need all of the arts, all of
right,
them.
right.
Yeah.
Lana, we've got to do a part two. Will you sit with me again here and we'll talk more? We've got to talk about Cecilia Wallach. We've got to talk about the poetry of absence. We've got to talk about grief, joy, sorrow, and all of the things that come together in your work. The book is called The Autobiography of Rain. It's available August 6th. And can you tell me the name of the publisher again? And there it is with a
Yeah,
beautiful
there it is. It's from Fernwood Press, which
Burnwood
is a
Press.
wonderful press here in Oregon. Yes.
And we'll put a link at the end of this video to make sure people can know how to get it. And I'm very appreciative of talking with you today. And I didn't hear you commit to part two. Is that a yes?
Oh, I would be delighted to.
Okay.
Delighted. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been
And
a
next
great
time you have to
pleasure.
read one of your poems.
I'll do it. I'm trying to keep the focus off me for a moment. It's unusual for me. I'm usually needing to be front and center, but this is about you today and this gorgeous collection, which I've had the privilege to have an advanced look at and go pretty deeply into. The autobiography of Rain, Lana Hechtman Ayers. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much, Christopher. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
I'm C.W. Emerson, and this is The Older American Poet. If you enjoy and value poetry, please like and subscribe to my channel and share it with others who might enjoy it too. Visit my website, theolderamericanpoet.com, to contact me, find out about upcoming readings, and how to purchase books. Remember, young or old, novice or pro, poetry is for everyone. So join me and let's do poetry together.